Claude, it's great to have you with us. Thank you for coming over the pond to be with us. Let me just ask you a couple of questions just by way of introduction. So, Claude, you look the picture of youth, but how many years have you been in the ministry?
Let's see, I need to stop and think. About 56.
Wow.
Nearly.
56
Soon to be
years.
56.
That's not possible.
Soon to be 56. I started as a child prodigy when I was 6. Not hardly true.
So 56 years
Yes.
of wisdom all wrapped up in Claude Thomas. That's the first question I wanted to ask. Second question, how many US presidents have you met? I didn't prep him for this.
All of your favorites. So you can pick and choose.
Okay.
Yeah.
You've met some of them.
I've met several, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I have.
Okay, and then thirdly, just before you kind of share with us, kind of tell us from your 56 years, what would be your biggest piece of advice to a young Claude Thomas who was 6 years old, starting out in the ministry? What would you have told him back then?
Oh, wow, that's a great question, Mark. And he had not prepped me on any of these questions, as you can tell already. I would think that I would say we have 3 sons who are in ministry. 2 of them are pastors, and one of them is a dean in a Baptist University in Oklahoma. He's the dean of the Hobbs College of Theology and Ministry there. By the way, he had to come to England to find out what a real education was all about. So he's a product of your system here. But I would say to him, we have a 4th son. Our oldest son is he's a barrister or whatever he's an attorney, whatever your title you give to them here. I would say to each one of them basically the same thing. I would say as soon as you can get on a track to love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And secondly, stay on that track until you learn to love others like God does. And thirdly, out of that love for God and that love for others, you'll learn to love who God has made you to be. That would be my word to them.
Brilliant. I think we can all go home. No, thank you, Claude. Claude's going to share for a few minutes about the beauty of the round table. So, Claude, thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark. And let me thank Mark and Andy and Richard Whiteman and all of his team for being such a great host and allowing me the privilege of being here to be with you. It is a historic occasion when you launch anything like this, because I was just reading again to remind myself how that God starts things and how he grows things. And if you'll remember, Jesus told his followers before his ascension, he said, whatever you do, just hang out right here. Don't go anywhere else, just hang out right here. And if you'll just hang out right here, I'm going to do something that you really don't even have the capacity at this moment to grasp what I'm going to do. And so there were 120. Are you with me? 120. Not 12,000, not 1,200, not just 12, 120. In other words, it was large enough for God to do what he wanted to do and small enough for nobody to get the credit for it but God. Here's what I want to say to you. You do not know what is happening here tonight. There's no way for you or me to measure what God is going to do out of this gathering tonight and tomorrow. Because this is not something that was a spur-of-the-moment idea that Mark and Andy and some of you had. This is something that God has had in his heart from before we ever were. And it's something God's had in his heart for a period of time. I was in London about 2002, and while I was there, I met with one of the great Christian laymen of England. And we sat at a hotel, and he looked at me and he said, Claude, he said, you know that we are your spiritual parents. And he was saying that England is the spiritual parents of America. The Great Awakening in America was fired and fueled by an Englishman. Americans got credit for a lot of it, but it was an Englishman. And this is not what I'm supposed to talk about, but it's what I'm talking about. And he said to me, he said, just remember, we are your spiritual parents. And I want to ask you to do something. This is in 2002. In August of 2002, as we sat there at the table, he said, I believe that in England, that we're poised for God to do something. And I want you to go back to America. I was pastoring at the time. And I want you to gather your friend of megachurch pastors. And I want you in your meeting that you have, I want you to share with them my heart. We're asking you to come and to help your spiritual parents. It was nearly a decade later. I called him while in London and I said to him, it's taken me a decade to heed and to hear, but I want you to know I am here. And we're passing it on to churches all across the U.S., that God is doing something in the motherland, as he called it. I want you to know that I believe that's true. I believe that God is doing something here in England. And isn't it an amazing thing as I looked at the geographical map of this planet, how small England is compared to China, Russia, Africa, South America, or America. Do you know that England is no larger than the state of Texas where I live? And I'm not saying that to be a braggadocious Texan. I'm just saying that to remind us that we're never to despise small beginnings or small things, because there's a postage stamp size piece of ground not very far from here by flight. It's called Israel. Just remember, what God's beginning here tonight, we have to trust him that he's going to take it and multiply it and use it, because I do believe. And my friend, by the way, is in finance, and he said the largest financial district in the world is not in Singapore, and it's certainly not in New York. He said it just happens to be in London. I just want you to know, from this place, God can do something that will touch the world. Well, I want to say to you tonight, from right here in Milton Keynes, God can do something, and I believe he's up to something to touch the world. Can you accept that? Can you accept that? Okay. Speaking of England, talk about roundtables. So I just did a little research, because I believe that roundtables are fitly designed to speak into the lives of leaders and to help leaders experience great leadership. I believe that's true whether you're in the corporate world or whether you're leading a church or a ministry. I think it's fitly shaped, designed, suited for leaders in the Christian world. Roundtable. You know, the roundtable was birthed out of English history and legend and lore. The word roundtable first appeared, mentioned by Wace in 1155. And he used it to describe King Arthur's famed table. You know about the legend, the lore, and the history of the famed table. He said that it was designed so all seats had equal status, had no seat at the head of the table. Legend has it that King Arthur and his knights first sat at the table, and the fame of the table spread so rapidly and so far that Arthur increased his personal entourage by inviting men distinguished from distant kingdoms to join it. During the Middle Ages, just in case they didn't teach you this in primary school in England, during the Middle Ages, roundtables became a permanent fixture in the history and the legend of English lore. Roundtable table celebrations and festivals were carried out during the Middle Ages. And today, there's an artifact known as the Winchester Round Table, a large table top hanging in Winchester Castle, bearing the names of various knights of Arthur's court. Those who study those things said it was probably created for one of the festivals celebrating the Round Table. Round tables. Today there are groups of people all across America and literally around the world, businessmen today and businesswomen, who sit down around a table. And it's even taken on the name the Round Table, where they discuss whatever their business is in very candid conversations, in collaborative ways. They talk about their business, the Round Table. I think the Round Table is a great way for Christian leaders to do this. A friend of mine is named John Maxwell. And some years ago, after I had done a lot of things with John and actually worked with him for a short period of time, John sent me an email promoting the roundtables. Here's what he said: "For many years, I've had the joy of speaking before large audiences. The further I get on the leadership journey, I'm increasingly convinced that the intimacy and openness of the round table format is a unique value for most top leaders. As one participant from last year's round table said, one that I was a part of, it is an investment that pays off on every level. Another participant shared, it is hands down the most unique and intimate learning opportunity that I can recommend for our leaders. I strongly recommend it for all executives." For 2 decades plus now, I've had the privilege of doing roundtables, leading them and participating in them, and leading roundtables with thousands of leaders, literally across the country from border to border and coast to coast in the U.S. and every continent except Australia. I've had the privilege of seeing what happens in roundtables. And so I'm an advocate of roundtables, and we do them. C3 Global is the organization that I lead. It's a network of churches, and we do this work everywhere. And when we do these roundtables, I've done them in cross-cultural situations. I've done them I was thinking about it, I've done them where they speak English and where they speak Mandarin and where they speak God only knows that I did not know. I just had someone I trusted was saying what I was saying while at the table. And in so doing, I've seen the impact and the effectiveness of the round table. How that when you get into those discussions, how things happen. And we do round tables in 3D-dimensional round tables. But I've been asked, what does the C3 stand for? We got a C3 conference. Some of you have been there. It is the Creative Church Conference, C3, birthed out of the Creative Church Center, the Fellowship Church, primary location in Grapevine, Texas. We developed C3 Global. It's a global network. What does it mean? Well, we orbit around 3 C's. We orbit around creative conversations. We orbit around candid discussions, conversations. We orbit around compassionate causes. So we, as an organization, as a network in leadership, we are advocates of the roundtable. I personally am an advocate of the roundtable. In the 3-dimensional roundtable, there are 3 dimensions to it. The first dimension is informational, and I would call it the didactic dimension, from the Greek word didache, which means the teaching, or didasko, which means I teach. And so from that, we get our word didache, which is the word teaching. And so there is an element of teaching around the round table. There is a topic, and that topic is taught briefly. And for a few moments, you talk about that topic to expose something of intrigue and interest that generates the second dimension. The second dimension is a discussion. We call that the candid conversation. You have a candid conversation. You have a collaborative, creative collaboration of ideas around the table. And with those creative ideas, as you collaborate, not to hold anything close to your vest. Let every idea you have. What we say in Roundtable is there are no dumb ideas and there are no dumb questions. The only dumb thing to happen around a table like that is if you have a question that there are probably 3 or 4 other people asking about the topic, but they're too shy to ask or too timid to do so. Or there's no dumb idea because you may have an idea that's dumb to you, but it's a genius idea for another person set around the table. So it is a creative approach where you do creative conversation and there's candid discussion. You're not playing games. You're not fooling around. There's none of that nonsense. You shake your head no to the nonsense and you shake your head yes to the real reality. Because here's the thing about it. Truth is always that which corresponds to reality. And around a table with a small group of people who have a common interest and a common goal, and the common interest is Jesus, and the common goal is to advance His mission. When you have those on your heart and they're preeminent around the table, what happens? It gives you the opportunity for God by His Spirit to do something in your life. The third dimension, you've got the didactic, you've got the discussion, but the third dimension is discovery. Because the whole idea is around the table that when we walk away, surely we have one of 2 things that have been helpful to us. One, we have established or advanced a relationship that we already have. We say you're not to live life alone and you're not to do ministry alone. And what we know about leaders, whether they're in the church world or whether they're out in corporate world, leaders have a propensity for isolation. All leaders have that propensity. And isolation for a leader is a dangerous thing. I heard a prominent psychologist say just Monday, he said, if you are in isolation, you are at target for a moral failure. Find a friend. Well, around that table, you have the opportunity to either establish a relationship of someone like-minded. And he also said, find someone who's like you to be a best friend. Don't find someone who's opposite to you. Marry someone who's opposite to you, but don't make them your best friend. And the idea that my wife or my husband's my best friend, well, let me tell you, my wife is my best friend, but she's a whole lot more than my best friend, even at 75 years of age. You get what I just said? If you didn't, God help you. So anyway, just moving on. So the third thing is discovery. The discovery part. You walk away from the table and you say, oh, I've discovered somebody that I believe I could be a friend to. I want the number. I want the email. I want to visit. I don't want to move in, but I want a good friend. I want someone who's like me. My 2 best friends in the U.S. are very much like me. One of them, he and I took a test together, and it was weird. You could just flip the pages. You know, one of these tests to see what your propensities and your strengths and all that stuff is. You know, he thought it'd be fun if we took one together. So he had his team to put it together, and we did it. And it's very much alike. They said you could just almost lay one on top of the other. Well, he's one of my best friends. His best friend. So you have a friend. The other thing that you walk away with is not only a relationship that has been established or extended or expanded or enriched, but you walk away with an idea. An idea. How many of you know that, as Ed Young, pastor of Fellowship Church, says, small tweaks can take you to giant peaks? Sometimes I just read recently. It's amazing what you learn if you read. And I'm not talking about the little snippets on Facebook or Twitter or something like that. That'll get you all messed up. You'll end up comparing yourself to people who are lying about themselves. So you're better off reading something that has some substance to it. And so I was reading this about these three guys that got together, decided that they would do something. And it was just a little idea that they had. They started piddling around with it. And now they got this whole thing moving. I'm eager to read the rest of the article because I want to find out what they're doing because they're getting filthy rich doing it. A little idea that they came up with. Let me tell you something. You can get an idea that'll move you away. I can tell you many times where I've gone to a conference like this and I've sat there, and when I got an idea, walked away, and that idea have literally changed the trajectory of my leadership in my church. An idea. If God gives you something, I have an axiom for life, and I'll finish with this. I have an axiom for life. If you're a learner, everybody's a teacher. You can learn valuable lessons from a worthless teacher, by the way. If you don't believe me, just look at the life of Judas. He wasn't a very good teacher, but there's a lot of lessons there. So if you are a learner, everybody's a teacher. Sit at the table with the idea that, God, you're going to speak to me while we sit around this table, and there's going to be something that you're going to lay on me. You're going to give to me. You're going to put it in my heart. You're going to spark it in my mind, my inner being. You see, life that is rightly lived is lived from the inside out, not the outside in. And if you get those ideas that God puts inside you, just an idea, a thought, a change, something that happens around that table, you will have been benefited very, very greatly. You've been benefited in relationship, which is a part of leadership, and you will be benefited in an idea, which is a part of leadership. Leaders take ideas and use them to move the ball down the court. That's what's going to happen here tonight. Now, I think we've got a couple of questions. We're going to do a roundtable exercise, right, Mark? We're going to do a roundtable exercise, and then there are a couple of questions around that. And so I'm going to let Mark tell you what they are. Again, let me just say to you, thank you for being here, and thank you for the opportunity, guys, for allowing me to be a part of this great gathering.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claude. Let's give Claude a round of applause. Thank you, Claude.